I appreciate being here. The Urban Land Institute having us to talk a little bit about our story, the Town Kitchen, which has been in existence for about 4.5 years. I want to share a little bit of how we're set up as an organization legally, as well as kind of our mission and the impacts that we've created over the last 4.5 years, as well as a little bit of insight on kind of where we're going as an organization as well. All right, so a little bit of background on Town Kitchen, or what we'll call as TTK. I'll refer to that throughout the presentation. We were founded in 2015 by 3 of our founders, and a large focus on being a public benefit corporation, which at the end of the day is a legal structure that allows us to balance for-profit as well as for public impact. We continue to focus on that as we grow the company to make sure that things are in equilibrium and we're not just driving a lot of revenue or a lot of financial impact and creating other issues within the communities that we serve. Our main focus as a public benefit corporation is to employ foster and reentry youth. We have a circle of nonprofits that we work with that help us with that, but our main focus at the end of the day is to create pathways and whatnot for the reentry individuals as well as foster youth through the work and the partnerships that we create. We're an East Oakland-based company. We're based in an opportunity zone today, and we service primarily the San Francisco Bay Area, from San Francisco all the way down to San Jose, as well as the East Bay. We've been able to double the size of the company over the last 2 years, primarily focused with reoccurring subscription customers that are very focused on creating impact in the community by directing dollars for services that they're already spending money on. Some of the things that we're finding today that are actually tailwinds for us and really helping us accelerate our growth as an organization is primarily within companies. We're a business-to-business service provider, and what we have found is that companies are really trying to, especially Millennial and Gen Z, companies are really trying to make sure that they can provide amenities like Facebook and Google have, right? They want that, they don't have the infrastructure to do it. In some cases, the jurisdictions won't let them. So they're really looking for that from a service provider like ourselves. They also need turnkey solutions because they don't have a lot of that infrastructure. If they're a smaller company, 30, 40, 50, 100 employees, they don't have the infrastructure to actually support a full service food program at their company. And so the other piece that we've seen as well, being from the Bay Area, both in Mountain View as well as San Francisco, is regulations around commercial kitchen space. We have the restaurant owners that are freaking out because they're not getting any daytime business from a lot of the technology companies or the finance companies, and they want to make sure that they're getting a piece of that, and so they're pushing through or trying to push through legislation or regulation to ensure that that can't happen and that those employees will be out and about getting their substance from a lot of these restaurants. And then most importantly, as we're seeing with our core buyer as an organization, it's primarily individuals that are in a facility manager role or an office manager role. And the Millennial and Gen Z buying power and what is actually behind their intentions is heavily focused and heavily supportive over what we do as an organization, which is take care of our employees and make sure that the dollars that they're spending as an organization are going to something good. Right? They all need food, they need a service. There's a lot of players that are out there, but by directing dollars through Town Kitchen, they're able to actually create a greater impact in their community while they're actually feeding their employees. So at the end of the day, as an organization, what do? We're a business-to-business, chef-crafted food delivery company. We use locally inspired and locally sourced ingredients with a chef-crafted menu. And we use more what we describe as kind of an amenity in a box, or infrastructure as a service for organizations that don't have the on-site facilities to be able to provide full turnkey solutions for their employee dining. The key thing for us, though, is we're really focused on not just building customers, but we're really focused on ensuring that we have partners for the long haul. We're a public benefit corporation, so it's really important for us to have a sustaining model that can continue to fuel our impact forward. And it's critical in how we set up our arrangements or partnerships that we're doing that through each transaction that we have. And I'll share a little bit more about that in a little bit. So as a company, yes, we provide meals, and yes, we provide food delivery, and we make it easy on office managers and facilities managers, but we're actually, we serve a bigger purpose in our communities. And we really like to think about it as growing our communities inside and out through a food program. For us, it's about a large focus on elevating minority and women-owned suppliers and making sure we can use our platform to elevate each of them both economically as well as exposure-wise to a lot of our partners that we're working with on the food delivery space. We also are empowering the untapped potential of our Bay Area youth, and we anticipate growing beyond that into other major metros as well. As I mentioned, our partnership-driven impact model is really core to both how we grow as an organization this year as well as future years. And then most importantly, as we're growing very quickly, it's very important for us, as we always talk about fueling our impact forward, that we do it through profitable revenue. We're not just chasing revenue for revenue's sake. So a little bit more about our partnership-driven impact model. We're not just focused on building customers that we're selling meals to. That's easy and we can do it, and there's plenty of business there to do. It's a $40 billion industry. But for us, it's more important to actually create pathways for our youth through that partnership. So when we sit down with our potential customers or partners, we're really talking to them about what their meal needs are and what we can do on a day in and day out basis from a service perspective, but we're also asking for services from them as well. We're asking for internships, we're asking for placement, we're asking for access with our youth to go into these locations, these office spaces that they've never seen before, that they haven't had access to, right? And so it really helps us as we're starting to work with our youth on their career roadmaps with us, which I'll talk about in a couple slides. It really helps inform their perspective on what's possible, right? And what their future can be. Yes, they came into the town kitchen as a culinary steward or potentially a delivery specialist, but the access to these companies and these properties really allow them to start to have a perspective on what's possible in their career. Maybe it's outside of the culinary or logistics track with us at the town kitchen. We also leverage our nonprofit partners to support our youth, both in case management, but also just providing employee pipelines for us of individuals that we want to work with and that we want to try and elevate professionally and economically. The critical thing for us, and we'll talk, as a core tenet to our organization's for-profit, for-public benefit balance on any given day is we have to have profitable revenue to fuel our impact. Most high or hyper-growth companies are tackling revenue and they'll figure out later how they're profitable. It's not okay for us. We have to do that day in and day out to make sure that we're actually a sustainable model. We're not a nonprofit, we're for-profit, for-public benefit, and trying to keep that in equilibrium. And those are metrics that I report out to my board and the other investors as well, is, how are we doing financially, but also how are we doing from an impact perspective? Are we doing what we say we do, and what are the numbers to support that? And how is it in equilibrium, and how do we create that right equation to ensure that this can sustain itself long-term and we're not relying on outside capital or, as in nonprofits, where you're constantly fundraising to try and sustain the model. I want to talk a little bit also about our local food ecosystem. One of the critical things for us, as I mentioned earlier, is elevating other businesses while we're coming up ourselves. And this is about minority and women-owned businesses. We're very fortunate in the local Bay Area, both in East Oakland, I should say, Berkeley, and the broader area, that we have some amazing food companies, especially in the plant-based movement. And it really allows us to work with these entrepreneurs and use our platform and use the exposure that we have with over 200 to 300 customers to be able to get them exposure to their businesses. Again, it's about access. It's about pathways that we can create to allow those businesses to thrive and get more exposure by working together, not just us producing everything and sending it out, but being able to actually get them exposure through our platform. And we do that through signage. We do that through identifying within our proposals for our customers and partners, like how and who we're actually working with, so that they get exposure to products that they may have not have known that exist in the local community. This graph just shows you a little bit of some of the partners that we're working with today. There's some crossover between some of our partners that are women-owned and minority-owned, as well as ones that also employ foster and reentry youth as well. So there's a bunch of layers to it, but ultimately it's about 1 + 1 = 3 because of the inertia that we have together with these companies and the aligned purpose and the drive that we have to elevate these particular populations. So our business model is relatively simple. At the end of the day, there's a lot of network type of delivery models that exist out there today, but for us, we really leverage kind of a back end, from a real estate perspective, a back end central commissary. I previously was at Revolution Foods, who've grown nationally. They're here locally as well, focused on the K through 12 segment. And there's great efficiencies with using a back end kind of, I would call, leverage commissary model or large, fresh food manufacturing facility to be able to get the efficiencies that are needed and also concentrate your employees in a certain area and get the benefits of that as well. And so we really leverage that in the Bay Area today. And then we have our own company-owned logistics. It's very easy to just go out and, every week there's a new delivery partner that has a networked effect, this and that and the other. But the critical thing for us is pathways. If I don't have delivery drivers that are on my payroll that I'm paying livable wage and giving company equity to and sending out to our customer base, they're not getting access to these companies that exist. They're not seeing what's possible out in the marketplace and how that can actually inform what their career roadmap with the town kitchen or even outside the town kitchen. The other piece to this as well is we have customers hire our employees, which in any other company I would say, I'm not okay with that. But for us, it's the holy grail. Anytime we have a customer that says, Luna or Bethlehem or Jefferson, we really would like to bring them on. They know our environment. They've already been here. They know how we like to work. They know our standards. We'd like to hire them away. And usually when we'll put them on a transition path and be able to do that, and it's really a great feeling for us as an organization to do that. At the end of the day, we're on-site setup and consumption. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of these companies don't have the infrastructure on site. Regulations is saying that they may not be able to have it if they don't have it. So a lot of companies are coming to us again for that amenity in a box and a turnkey solution to be able to get their employees high quality, locally sourced, community impact driven meal on a daily basis, or maybe it's a weekly or monthly basis, depending on the customers. So I'd like to transition a little bit to our youth experience. I mentioned earlier foster and reentry youth. Our focus primarily is between 18 and 25-year-olds. A lot of times, some of our reentry individuals are a little bit older than that, but that's kind of the core age range that we typically look at. For us, when we bring them in and we work with our nonprofit partners, which I'll show you a couple examples of in a slide or two, we really focus on not just employing them or job training, which we should be doing anyways, but how do we index to livable wages and beyond? And how do we make sure that they have kind of ownership in the company, whether it's short or long term? And that today looks like equity in the company, which is more long term, and we're evaluating revenue share and other type of structures to make sure that these populations we're working with need money today or next paycheck. Equity is great, but it's long term. So how do we think about the short and medium term to make sure that they're compensated and we can, again, elevate them professionally and economically while they're working with us? We also establish a career roadmap with them initially when they come in. Usually it's a limited perspective on what they want to do. They get in with us and we start to lay the foundation for them of what's possible, okay? Mentorship as well as upward mobility opportunities that exist. But again, the access and exposure to other properties outside of our facilities is really what gives them perspective and helps inform their career roadmap with us longer term. There's also components about leadership and life skills. We have a lot of employees that come in that don't know the importance of a bank account or don't know the importance of registering to vote. Those are all things that we today have built into our career roadmaps with them to make sure some of the soft skills and just the life skills are actually taught, one, the importance of it, but we also connect them with those solutions, whether it's our financial partners, our legal partners, and really bringing them into our environment to be able to create these workshops for our employees. And then mostly, as I talked earlier, we have career pathways into our partner companies. This is the most critical piece to what we do as an organization, is to elevate them professionally and economically. As most of you know, it's very expensive to live in the Bay Area. And so we want to be able to get them into higher paying jobs, both within our company, but I would say probably 30 to 40% of our employees are likely going to need to move outside of our company, especially with the engineering jobs and other things that exist in the Bay Area, where they can make a significantly amount more money in a different trade. So I talked a little bit about our nonprofit partners. We leverage our nonprofit partners that are very aligned with us, that work with the populations of foster and reentry. So as we grow geographically, we have kind of in our impact strategy, who are those partners and how do we leverage them and for what services to help us get to the core individuals that need our help, but also that we can put the right support structure once they get hired. There's things that we're not equipped to do as a leadership team with how a lot of our employees are showing up to work. There's trauma and other things that are informing their state of being when they come to us. And so we leverage a lot of these nonprofit partners, whether it's Not for Sale, the Bread Project, Food Shift, and others, to really help do some of that case management work once these employees are on our payroll. Our model creates positive impacts. Over the last 4.5 years, we've been small. We tried to get our footing early on. We struggled a little bit. Over the last 18 months, we've really been able to get some very significant traction. We've hired 65 employees, 65 youth over the course of the last 4.5 years. We've been able, or the equivalent to 21 full-time employees. But as you can see from the hours we're creating yearly, this year we're going to double again. So the model is starting to take off. We're starting to get some of those tailwinds of the trends that I told you about earlier that are really helping our model move forward. We're seeing significant traction and support from a lot of our partners on reoccurring, coming back to us, and most importantly, we're sharing with them the impact they're creating by working with us. So how does that translate? Well, just a couple key metrics that we look at. Our employee retention, service industry is usually over 100% turnover. We actually measure it in retention. We retain 70% of our employees. Our clients, our customers, our partners are huge ambassadors. They say, we tell everybody about you, we love what you do. Our net promoter score is 78 for the year. Most importantly, how do we fuel this impact forward? 81% year over year growth. We're on track to do roughly 75% this year. So our traction continues, as I mentioned. We finished last year out just over $1 million. We expect 75% growth this year. And we're very strong margins to continue to fuel our impact forward as an organization. Our growth moving forward and our focus is, basically it's easy, it's fives. I love fives, so it's next 5 years, $50 million revenue recurring company, as well as impacting 500 individuals' lives. By the growth, creates jobs. The jobs, we can help them elevate professionally and economically through that growth into higher paying roles within our organization, but also within our partner organizations. The other piece that we really can do is, between the expansion, is to continue our impact in the local food ecosystem. So in summary, for-profit, for-public benefit companies can create healthier communities. We can leverage the untapped potential of the local workforce and the youth, and we can also improve the economic resilience of these communities as well. But most importantly, we're developing the leaders of tomorrow, and we're helping them elevate professionally and economically. Appreciate your time this morning. If you'd like to join our movement, you can just scan the QR code on the screen. It'll take you and share more about our company and the impact we've created. Thank you so much.
I guess it's still morning. My name is Karen Washington. I'm a farmer and an activist, believe it or not. At one time, I was a physical therapist for 37.5 years, gave that up to follow my dream. So we want to talk about food justice and also look through the lens of people who live in marginalized community and the effects that the food system has on them. So food justice is more than just growing food and feeding people. So in 1996, the World Food Summit defined food security as existing when all people at all times have access to sufficient, safe, nutritious food to maintain a healthy and active life. Now, people have told us time and time again, in marginalized communities, in order to be food secure, you have to eat vegetables, give up soda and drink water, and exercise, as if by magic, eating vegetables and drinking water and exercising is going to change the food system without looking at the structural, industrial determinants that reinforce racism in our society. For me, as a farmer, I had to understand the food system because I grew up not knowing anything about farming. My parents weren't farmers, my grandparents weren't farmers. I never questioned the food system. I never questioned who grew the food or where it was coming from. The only thing I knew that my mother was a great cook. And so I started to look at some of the social problems that we're having in my neighborhood regarding the food system, and saw that food by itself could not stand alone. That food was impacting so many social and economic issues in my community, such as housing, the environment, health. But time and time again, people were telling us that the food system was broken and it needed to be fixed. And at one time, I was drinking that Kool-Aid. But then I started to peel back and saw that the food system was doing exactly what it was supposed to do, preventing people from eating good, healthy, fresh produce and food. And so I started to, again, peel back the food system, the layers of the food system, and started to ask the question, in the greatest country on earth, where we grow enough food and we feed enough food, we have hunger and poverty. Why is that? That's a question I ask each and every day. Because at one time, it wasn't like that. If you look at our indigenous forefathers, they grew their own food. They didn't go to a grocery store or bodega. They didn't use chemicals. What they did was they grew enough food and fed their families. They didn't cage their animals. They never thought about owning anything. They never thought about owning animals, owning seeds, owning land, and most of all, owning people. But if you look at the early 1990s, in terms of farming, we had over 50 million farmers, 500 million acres of land, farmland. Now, today, only 2 million. We had 40% of our population lived on farms, now 2%, even less for people of color. And in 1979, the Secretary of Agriculture, Earl Buss, told the young farmer, the small and mid-sized farmer, either get big or get out. And so, has our food system gotten better because it become more industrialized due to technology? That we grow food much more efficiently, cheaper, less labor? Something to think about. Has the land of milk and honey become the land of greed and money? And I say that because food now has become a commodity, just like land. And so what happened to our food system? Well, first of all, a food system that was once plant-based, fruits, vegetables, and grain, is now animal-based. As a result, our caloric intake has increased from 2,000 calories per capita to over 3,800 calories per capita. What happened? We've gone from a diversified food system to monocropping. We've gone from home cooking to fast food. We've gone from eating within seasons to eating everything all year round. Just think about how we eat watermelon or cherries in December. And the most common thing that has happened in our food system is our reliance on a subsidized food system of high fructose corn syrup. As a result, has resulted in cheap processed food, which is seen mostly in low-income and marginalized communities, both urban and rural. At one point, the economy, the government was paying over $280 million in high fructose corn syrup, which in turn was seen in low-income neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color. In fact, they've even paid some farmers not even to farm on their land. And so as we go around talking about the food system, there are terms that you're going to hear about. For example, the term food deserts, and I know a lot of you have heard that term food desert, and I'm not too happy about that term because it's an outsider term that has been used to talk about communities that have less access to healthy food and live and don't live within a mile of a grocery store. Now, I had to, call my friends in Oakland and Detroit and Philly and say, do we live in a food desert? Because we never heard that term. And so even people in the desert were saying, we got food, but what we don't have is healthy food options. So I turned and coined the term food apartheid. And I coined that term because I want people to understand it's more than a desert. When we talk about food apartheid, I want people to understand that we need to talk about the institutional, the structural racism that we have in the food system, and we need to talk about it in terms of economics, in terms of demographics, and in terms of race. And if we don't have that conversation, then we don't talk about the food system that is dominated by a group of just a handful of people. And so using the term food apartheid really opens up the conversation of what's wrong with the food system. Another term you're going to hear all the time is food justice. And so the title of this talk is about food justice and mitigating inequalities. And I say that because it's a term that a lot of people have been using to patent their programs. But I tell people the term food justice means nothing now. And I say that because if you look at the definition of food justice, it's a transformation of the current food system, including but not limited to eliminating disparities and inequalities. And if you look at that definition, in order for you to be working within food justice, it has to be transformational. In other words, it's not a passive movement, it's an active movement. So when people talk about food justice for me, I need to see what you are actively involved in dismantling social injustice. And so some of the social injustice things that we need to talk about, if we're going to really move this food system forward to be just, then we have to talk about the persistent inequalities we have along race, gender. Just think of the food system. How many of you know that the majority of food in agriculture that is grown worldwide is by women? But yet, women worldwide have limited access to technology, land, and capital. When we talk about the lack of opportunities to be self-sufficient and self-reliant, what does that mean? I live in a community that is surrounded by a charity-based food system, full of soup kitchens and food pantries. Granted, I'm not taking away from them because they do an excellent job. But when it becomes people's way of living, I have a problem with that. We have a charity-based food system that needs to be broken. And how is this broken? It's through economic development, financial literacy, people coming into marginalized communities to talk about being self-sufficient and self-reliant instead of always thinking about going to the nearest food pantry or soup kitchen. The lack of land. So I'm here at this conference because we're talking about land. And we have a problem. We have a problem in our cities and we have a problem globally where we have outsiders going into different countries to take land and their resources. Here we have in our cities people coming into communities and displacing them, taking their land to build better housing or development. I don't know about that. Economics, again, lack of living wages for people, especially those that have been told time and time again that we're preventing people coming into our country because they're taking our jobs. What jobs are they taking? How many of you know or have heard of people coming in from this country or people here in America that are willing to go into the fields to do the work that a lot of immigrants do in terms of farming? The lack of understanding the historical content of trauma. We have to understand that there have been a group of people who have been enslaved for so many years, and there is trauma to that. We have been told time and time to go away from the land. And as a result, you have seen what happened. Going away from the land has resulted in a food system where we have type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and obesity. And lastly, power. And I'm going to talk about that a little later, because we have a handful of people and companies that are controlling the global food system. And how do we allow that to happen? But if we think about power, power is like a drug. People don't want to give it up. But in order to advance a food system that is just, sustainable, and equitable, it's about giving up power. And how that looks, I'll talk about it later. Next, food sovereignty, another term you're going to hear about if we talk about a just food system. Food sovereignty, again, doesn't mean anything, been co-opted, because food sovereignty was really devised by indigenous and peasant people in the global south. For years, they have been fighting for self-governance, fighting for the ability to own their own land, fighting for the ability to grow their own food in a way that doesn't replicate the capitalistic society that extracts resources, but brings in the knowledge and the power of the people who have been marginalized by people over them, and giving back their responsibility and their power in governing. Both work together so that we have a food system that is just and equal for all. So, what are the things people are doing to bring back the food system? What are they doing to really mitigate the fact that we have a food system that's not just? Many of them are taking matters back into their own hands, and they're forming cooperatives. They're going back to the land, understanding that the power they have is owning land. They're thinking about the development of seeds. The problem that we have here in this country is that we have a handful of companies that have patent seeds. And so many of them are defying that and holding on to their seeds. Because if we allow a handful of companies to control our seeds, then think about who we are in terms of DNA. They will be controlling us. They're growing their own food for healing and medicine. They're forming their own cooperatives. They are rewriting the history in books that have told us time and time again that people of color had no influence in the agricultural system. But I'm here to tell you that as a group of people who came here enslaved, we were the ones with seeds in our hair that came and taught the settlers how to grow food. We were the ones who did crop rotation. We were the ones that did irrigation. We were the ones that made America what it is today when it comes to the food system, but it's not taught in schools. And so understanding that Columbus did not discover America, that America was already here, is important. The fact that we are now forming collaborations, getting people to understand the value that they have, giving people the space and the opportunity to grow their own food and have their own land. I live in the Bronx, and the biggest thing that was a detriment to the Bronx in New York City is Robert Moses. And I say that because Robert Moses, who has been a pioneer in terms of development, put a huge highway through the Bronx, the Cross Bronx Expressway. Many of you have been in New York City, and as a result, has divided a neighborhood and a community of haves and have-nots. And I'm telling you this because as developers, I want you to think about the impact that you will have in communities, the impact that you have without taking the consideration of culture, the consideration of people's value, their tradition. And so what I want you to take from this talk about food justice and land use is that how do we develop a country whereby there's no more hunger and poverty, because hunger and poverty is man-made. And if we're going to look at the recourse of development, then we have to think about how do we develop in such a way that maintains the green space that is needed. How do we develop in such a way that there is inclusion and diversity? And when I talk about inclusion, I mean the ability for people to have a say and to own power. Like I said from the very beginning, power. Power is a drug. People don't want to give that up. And as long as we have a system that is dominated by power, it will remain stagnant and resistant to change. And so 3 things that we have to do is either you're going to give it up, you're going to share it, or it's going to be taken away. And that's going to be the new food revolution, because hunger and poverty is not sustainable. What are some of the things that we can do together? Well, we can all fight for the right for people to have food and water. It's a God-given right. It's a human right. And now you see cities throughout the country are fighting to have clean water and a decent place to live and food to eat. The right to have food label. It's not rocket science. I want to be able to read a label and know what I'm putting in my body. And if I can't pronounce it, then there's something is wrong. The right to protect land from land grabbers or people being displaced. Very, very important as we talk about that G word, gentrification. We have to make sure that people are not displaced because they don't have money or because of the color of their skin. We need to make sure that there is housing and ability for housing for everyone. The right to have seeds, not to own them. As I said in the very beginning, we should not be owning anything. We should be stewards of the land, stewards of food. Once food and land became a commodity based on profits, not on people, we have a problem. The right for farmers and farm workers and fishermen and restaurant workers, all hidden in the food chain supply that you don't even think about. Going into a restaurant, sitting down and eating something for $25, knowing that the person is in the kitchen getting maybe 50 cents an hour. We need to change that. The right to share resources, wealth, and land. And I say that because if we're going to shift this food system, if we're going to talk about a just food system, an equitable food system, it's about sharing power, sharing wealth, sharing resources, and sharing land. And I say to people time and time again, if you want to help people who are marginalized, both urban and rural, then there's 3 things that you have to do. 1 is provide opportunity. 2nd is to provide resources. 3rd is to provide capital, because people who are once deemed powerless become powerful. And so I'm going to end with this. This is what I say time and time again. To grow your own food gives you power. You know why and who you grew it for? Because you grew it for yourself, your family, and your community. My name is Karen Washington. I'm a farmer. I grow food. I feed people, body and mind. Thank you. So there's mics on either side. Come up and talk to us.
My question really equates to water as an economic investment versus the reality of water as a human need. And I'd like to hear some of your comments on what's the right balance, is there a right balance, and how do we make water really something that's not a resource that we're losing, given the fact that fresh water is like 3% of all water in the world?
Thank you so much. A very, very good question. And I think from the very beginning, when we talk about food and water, it has become a commodity. Something that food and water, first of all, should be a human right for all. And if you live in California, I know Eric in California, we know what's happening with water when it comes to agriculture, how farmers are now having a problem in terms of water. We have to make sure that within our citizenship here, to make sure that water is not used as a weapon for people who don't have access to it. Or we have to make sure that companies don't go into, which is happening now, going into other people's property and then claiming it's their own. But that comes from all of you being proactive. I stand up here as an activist because I feel that I have a power to be vocal. But if a lot of us come together and stand up for a human right of food and water, things will change. The biggest problem that we have in any movement is complacency. If we continue to be complacent, letting the government and politics control our food and water system, then time and time again, we're going to reach a point whereby food is going to be more valuable than gold, food and water will be more valuable than gold and any other resources on earth. So it's up to you. That's my answer.
Okay. Hi, I have questions actually for both of you, if I may. Eric, just starting with you, your program sounds fantastic, but do you also encourage the people who come to you, the youth, to go on and further their education so they can be prepared for some of the very more sophisticated tech jobs in your area?
Yeah, I mean, we do through their career road mapping with us and some of the leadership and life skills that I had talked about. You know, when we say education can mean a lot, right? I mean, it can mean a coding camp that allows them to get a software job versus having to go to a 4-year university. So we build that into their career roadmap, and again, it's informed based on what they're experiencing and the access and kind of what is starting to actually interest them as it relates. And some of them just, they want to stay in the culinary track, and you know, some of the nonprofits we work with actually have culinary training programs that they're coming from that. So we do, it's a big focus for us, is elevating them professionally and economically, and that does include education.
Thank you. And then Karen, your passion is very contagious. There's so much in your talk. Where do you start?
Like I said, I really start in terms of activism. I put the responsibility on you all, especially the next generation, to stand up. When you see injustice, you got to call it out. You just can't sit back and just allow our country to, the greatest country in the world. Why do we have hunger and poverty? Why in the middle of the night there are people homeless, sleeping on benches here? And so if we can actively come together, especially those who have wealth, to share that wealth, we need to do that. But the biggest problem is power. People don't want to give that up. People don't want to see the next person move up the ladder to be like them. So we have to, especially young people, you have to, when you see injustice, you have to speak out. The fact that we live in the greatest country, hunger and poverty, that we have problems with water, where is the outrage? It has to come from us. And so I'm just one person. But when I see injustice, I speak and I call it out. And that's what everyone should do.
Okay, can I ask another question?
Well, can you
okay,
go
sorry, I will.
Okay, my name is Betsy Delamonte. I'm an architect from Dallas, Texas, and we've got a couple of great programs in Dallas. One is the Millennium Cafe that employs young at-risk youth and gives them some of the same kind of training and mentoring that you've referred to. And there's another one called Bonton Farms that uses recently released incarcerated to farm and create food for their community. These are great programs, but they're small. They're very small, and what I like about hearing the two of you speak together is you're teaming the nonprofit with the for-profit. How do we start to connect the dots to do more of that? How can we, Dallas is, I'd say, the buckle of the free enterprise belt. We are certainly known for our economic situations, but how do we harness that to bring the people that want to help with the people who have the ability to help?
So I live in the Bronx, all right? Out of 20 counties in the Bronx, 60 counties in the Bronx ranks 62 as the most unhealthiest. I am surrounded by a charity-based food system, food pantries, soup kitchens. We have to break that mold of a charity-based food system. And I tell everybody, Warren Buffett, Microsoft, Google, you're out there, they need to come into marginalized communities with education and technology, education about financial literacy, education on how to save, how to invest, how to prepare credit. But that's not taught. You know, people come in, all they want to do is sign people up for the nearest food pantry and soup kitchen. I'm saying that right now, we need education, technology education, so that people can have good paying jobs. But again, where are the companies? Because I know how to fix it. Come into marginalized communities with training, the next generation on technology, the next generation on financial literacy, and see how things will change. Where are those companies? Where are those companies that are coming into low-income neighborhoods, both urban and rural, marginalized communities, and set up these programs instead of allowing them to maintain on a charity-based welfare system? That's what I ask time and time again, because it can be fixed.
Yeah, and I agree with that point. I think it really, you know, as I mentioned earlier, we're for profit, for public benefit. It's how do you use business for a force for good? And the education piece, I mean, we live it daily. It's so critical. It is so critical to make sure that we're elevating, you know, our youth and the leaders of tomorrow on what's possible, so that they can, you know, continue to run with it. So.
Can I just say one more thing too? We need to change our lens on how people look at us. First of all, I've been called minority, and I feel I'm the majority, underserved. I've been called marginalized and poor. And the thing about it, I had to change my lens on how I look at people, because marginalized and poor people are strong people. They have limited resources, and they do so much with limited resources, something out of nothing. And so we need to change how we look at people like that. Instead of looking at them in terms of problems and needs, we need to look at them in terms of solutions and wants. Because if you ask a person what they need, it comes from a position of deficit. If you ask them what they want, it comes from a position of power.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think for us, it's about the untapped potential, right? I mean, there's so much potential. We see it every day with our youth, what they can bring, and they surprise us every day with, you know, where they can go and how they can elevate. And I couldn't agree more with Karen on that point.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Melinda, and I'm a policy analyst for the city of Los Angeles, and I think you both are doing wonderful work. What would be your biggest ask then for a large urban center? What have you either seen done that's been very successful, or what would you like to see that would promote your work from a policy standpoint?
In cities, access to land. Land is very, with development happening, as some of you know, this forecast by 2050, there'll be an additional 2 billion more people on Earth. And so how do we balance development with land use and agriculture? And so there has to be systems in place that protects land and the environment for future generation. I want to see that in change in policy. I want to be able to tell my young people that look like me that they have land to farm. Because right now that's a problem. That's a problem. So policy has to change in such a way that people have equal access to land and that also resources. Good question.
Yeah, I mean, Karen mentioned it earlier on the statistics as far as access to capital, right? And we see it with our organization as well. And like that is the #1 thing, and being able to stimulate, you know, more access to capital. I think land absolutely is fundamental and foundational to it, but also access to capital. For a lot of, I mean, there's some amazing entrepreneurs, you know, that we work with on a daily basis, and the struggles that they have to just get their companies up and running and access to capital and the ability to even dream of having a storefront in your development it's like it's ridiculous. And so, I think building, being able to build a business model that actually continues to fuel impact, is in some ways a lot harder than just trying to get, VC money to launch the next new technology thing. So, I mean, I think foundationally it's definitely land access, and then on top of it, capital, to really help them realize their dreams and make it easier.
Can I just say a little secret that we're trying to do? So we have a group of us who are trying to develop a Black Farmers Fund in the state of New York, and the red tape. And the thing about it, we want to build a fund so that people who are claimed marginalized have a way to put into that, because we have to start rethinking about the capitalist society that has failed so many of us. If we can get people in communities to think about their social capital and their worth and putting money back into the communities where they live and let that money grow and that it can be shared amongst each other, that's our message. But the red tape to try to get that fund up and running, so again, red tape, get rid of a lot of the red tape for people that are trying to be self-sufficient and self-reliant and making sure that people have a way to govern themselves.
I'd like to follow up on the point you made about access to land. And does that have anything to do with what I guess people call the urban-rural divide? There seems to be a lot of farmland that's been abandoned outside of metropolitan areas, small farms. And is that the kind of land that you're talking about, or are you talking about land that is more urban, urban located?
We hate to use that term urban. That term has been used against us. We're trying to do urban and rural together because the issue of land, access to land, affects both. And so again, it's outsiders trying to divide us, but when we talk amongst each other, we know that the basic problem is access to land, both for a young farmer and a farmer in a rural area and a farmer in an urban area, so that the divide doesn't exist. The question we should be asking is the availability and access to land both in urban and rural settings, and not thinking about it being divisive.
We've got time for one more question, so I think we're right on the money. It's good.
I wanted to ask you two questions. Do you have any online resources or books that you can recommend to us? And I also work for the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, and we have an ag reserve, and we have an agro-tourism study that we're producing right now to bring people back to the land. Thank you for mentioning the trauma, because people, not only complacent, but the complacency is as a result of frustration sometimes, where you feel like you can't make progress. So just wanted to know what your thoughts were about agro-tourism and the production of food as being a way to bring people back to the earth, like give them that passion that you have, Karen, around producing food. Because our ag reserve, I think the majority of the land is not used for food production.
So a good book is Farming While Black by Leah Peterman. That's a good Freedom Fighter Farmers by Monica White. Those are two books to look at. Good question. As an African American, we have always been taught growing up that growing food and farming was slave work. And it wasn't until, again, looking at the history, understanding that why we were brought here, not because we were dumb and stupid, we were brought here because of our knowledge of agriculture. That shift changes how African Americans feel about themselves in terms of their participation in this food system. So, 2010, we started for the first time a conference. It's called a Black Farmers Conference, whereby for the first time in history, in a conference where over 500 people of color who for the first time saw scientists, statisticians, teachers, farmers, to talk about agriculture in such a way with their voices and their faces. And that's what's missing in food conferences. I go around food conferences to talk about food justice and food equality, but when I go out there, I can look on my hands and count how many people that look like me. So we need to make sure that when we talk about the food system that is fair and just, that we talk about it in a way of being diverse and inclusive. And diversity does not mean to have a couple of people show up and that's because that's tokenism. Inclusion means diversity. Inclusion means having people who have been marginalized and people of color, that they have a voice and a say and they have power.
One other book I just add, and then I'm happy to talk afterwards as well, is Clean Money Revolution by Joel Solomon. It's a great book on using your capital for good and areas to look at putting it in. So thank you for the time this morning. We appreciate it. Have a great day.